Right, today we're going to be changing the shocks on our Mk3 Focus 1 litre EcoBoost. Now what you find is it's a reasonably common fault for those shocks to be leaking. It happens in a lot of cars, but the thing to remember here is whether you've got broken spring, you want to fit aftermarket coilovers, anything like that, it's the same sort of job. So what we're going to do is show you how to do it and what to look out for. Right, so it's a relatively straightforward job this. Just get your car up on axle stands first, get your wheels off. There's a couple of little bits to look out for. The first is the anti-roll bar links. Now these can be a bit of a pain to get off. It normally comes off with an Allen key and a 15mm spanner. But if you can't get them off, a lot of times you have to cut it. So that's why we always have a spare set knocking around. They're only about a tenner, so definitely worth having. The other side is the brake pipe. So you pull that off with an 8mm spanner. Once everything's out of the way, you can start dismantling the main strut. Right, as you can see, the anti-roll bar link come off pretty easily, but when you look at it, there's quite a lot of play in that. So as we've got the new ones anyway, we're going to take them off the bottom of the anti-roll bar as well and fit them as we do the job. Right, to get the bottom of the strut off, there's a little 15mm pinch bolt at the back. Now the idea is you can blast this out with your gun, use a ratchet, however you want to get that out, pull that out, and then you spread the little flange at the back to just give it enough access to get this out from where it's sitting. Now you can get a chisel in there, you can use a big screwdriver. I like to use one of these. It's a spreader particularly to do the job. They're only about £5 on eBay. And what it is, it's a little cam socket. So you put that in the gap, twist it round, and what it does is it opens it just enough to give you enough clearance to pull the strut out. Right, now we've got the bottom pinch bolt out, we can just give the hub a tap downwards just to release the bottom, and then we can get up under the bonnet and take off the top bolts. Now the top retaining bolts for the suspension strut, unfortunately, are stuck under here. So that means we've got to take all this plastic work off and the wiper arms. Pretty straightforward, but we get that done and then we can actually get to the top of the suspension. Right, now we've got that plastic off, we can finally actually get to the bolts. Now it's held in by three 13mm bolts, so we just whip them off, then we can get back underneath the car. So with all that out of the way and the pinch bolt out, the idea is to knock down the hub so you can free the bottom of the strut. Now these struts are actually pretty long, so no matter what you might see in a manual or read on the internet, they're not that easy to get out. How do we know this? Because we've already done the other side. So what I'd recommend to do this job is to use spring compressors, get them in there, clamp down the springs slightly, and what this will do is it will shorten the length of the strut, making it far easier to get out. Right, finally we've got the strut off the car. It took a bit of work, but we got there. Now for the new strut, we're going to reuse the top mount, we're going to reuse the dust cover and the spring. Now to strip down this strut, it's really easy. It's an 18mm nut with a 6mm hex in the middle. What you really need to do is make sure your spring compressors are solid. That's the most vitally important thing, because once you take this end off, if the spring's not under compression, a shoot out could break your jaw. So we're going to get this down on the floor. Our spring compressors, we'll check those, and then we'll take it apart and put it on a new one. Right, so we've built up our new strut, we've taken off the spring compressors. As you can see, the spring's now sitting perfectly. So we're going to put it back on the car, starting with the top. We'll put those in first and then we'll line up the bottom, get it all together. Right, with the strut finally back into place at the top and the bottom, now it's just a case of jacking it up so it locates properly and we can start putting it all back together. Now the last part of the job of course is making sure everything's torqued up correctly with your torque wrench. Now these anti-roll bar link nuts are 48 Newton meters, the bottom pinch bolt is 80 Newton meters, and then when you've put the wheel back on, got it all down on the floor, you can go to the top nuts and they'll be 35 Newton meters. Once that's done, you can just put all the trim back on under the bonnet and that's the job done. Right, we've done our front suspension. Now we'll move on to something a little bit easier, which would be the rear shocks. Now on a Focus, again, it's a city car. You may find your rear shocks are leaking. It's quite a common thing. On our car in particular, we've taken a good look at the springs on the back. The springs are fine, but equally, if you needed to change those, it's just a case of dropping the control arms, putting new springs in and putting them back up. Now, to take the shocks off, it's really easy actually. It's only 3 bolts, so there's 1 on the bottom and 2 on the top. And then it's just a case of swapping over the mounts, putting it all back on again. So that's what we're going to do now. Right, so the first thing we do is make sure that everything's adequately supported, including the hub and the control arm. Second thing is taking out the strut. So it's a 15mm bolt on the bottom, 2 10s on the top, and then we should be able to lift the whole thing out. Right, so the next part of the job is to swap over the top mount and the dust cover onto our new shock. Now this is done with a 13mm spanner and a pair of grips and a little bit of patience. So we'll get that off, swap them over, do them up, then we can get back on the car. Right, with the dust cover and the top mount actually off of the old shock, you can see it hasn't really got much resistance and it has been leaking a little bit around there. Whereas the new one, just got a bit more oomph in it. Right, and that's our new strut, nicely built up. So now it's just a case of popping it back on the vehicle, just like we took it off. Right, now the last job of the day is to torque everything to the right specs. Now the top mounts are torqued on at 25 Newton meters and the big bolt on the bottom is a whopping 115. So we'll put them on, put the wheel back on, and then we can take it for a drive.